Is one shot for all better than none for some? I'm Michael Smerconish in Philadelphia. President Joe Biden used a primetime address to the nation on Thursday to lay out an encouraging timeline.
All adult Americans will be eligible to get a vaccine no later than May 1. Let me be clear. That doesn't mean everyone's going to have that shot immediately, but it means you'll be able to get in line beginning May 1.
But 7 members of the GOP Doctors Caucus say the U.S. is missing an opportunity to save lives when it comes to vaccine strategy. They sent a letter to the acting secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services asking that they immediately review new data to, quote, enhance and increase the current vaccine administration. Specifically, they believe that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were so effective that after just one dose, we should give one shot to as many people as possible and come back for a second dose as more vaccines are available. It's an approach already being taken by our allies across the pond. While the vaccine manufacturers recommend waiting only about a month in between both doses, the UK took the step of extending the interval to around 12 weeks. Scientific advisors there said that this would provide at least some protection to as many people as possible in the early stages of the vaccine rollout. But in response to the Doc Caucus letter, the Wall Street Journal published this piece titled, U.S. Government Scientists Skeptical of One-Shot Regimen for Pfizer Moderna COVID Vaccines. The lead read as follows. U.S. government scientists are pushing back against calls for one-dose regimens for 2 COVID-19 vaccines designed to be administered with 2 shots, saying there isn't enough evidence that a single dose provides long-term protection. Among those quoted, Peter Marks, the director of the Food and Drug Administration's center that oversees vaccines, who said this: it is essential that these vaccines be used as authorized by FDA in order to prevent COVID-19 and related hospitalizations and death. Similarly, Paul Offit of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, who served on the FDA advisory panel that recommended the use of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, said those clinical trials, quote, found a level of neutralizing antibodies with 1 dose that was significantly less than what they got with 2. Senator Dr. Roger Marshall, also a signator on the original Doc Caucus letter, fired back with a Wall Street Journal op-ed titled, One Shot is Better Than None. Here's what he said. After every senior citizen and high-risk individual gets their 2 shots, applied science would suggest we could save tens of thousands of lives if we give 1 shot to as many people as possible and came back for a second dose as more vaccines are available. Consider this. If you had 200 Pfizer vaccines and 200 family members, and it was up to you, how would you allocate them? The current emergency use authorization tells you to give 100 people 2 shots. Assuming it will be 95% effective, only 100 people would be vaccinated and 95 would be protected. Alternatively, you could give 200 people 1 shot. Assuming 75% effectiveness, 150 people at a minimum would be protected. Much of the preliminary data on the effectiveness of 1 dose has not yet been peer-reviewed. It all leads me to this week's survey question at Smerconish.com. Do you agree or disagree? Give a first vaccine shot to the most people possible instead of waiting for both doses to become available. To understand more about the shots for all approach, I spoke with Senator and Dr. Roger Marshall from his car. Doc Marshall, thank you so much for being here. I think I get what you want to do. You want to stretch out a limited supply of vaccine. Make the case.
Well, thanks. You're exactly right. I want to save lives. So we have a finite resource, and there's lots of real-world data that shows if we gave a lot of people 1 vaccine, we'd save more lives if we gave fewer people 2 vaccines. And I just want to be clear. I want seniors to get their second shot. I want people with high-risk problems to get their second shot. But we will reach herd immunity much, much more quickly and save lives if we give everybody 1 shot and come back in 2 or 3 months and give them their second shot. Lots of real-world data out there. The UK is already doing this. So I want to give the FDA the power, the authority to use this real-world knowledge and save more lives.
Critics say we don't have sufficient long-term data to do what you're recommending.
Look, I think there's plenty of data out there to say that after 1 shot, of the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine. It's 75% to 90% effective, and that it's very safe to come back and give it in 3 months. So I think that there's enough data to consider doing that. But mostly I want to give the FDA the flexibility to make that decision. I think even in 2 weeks or 4 weeks from now, there'll be enough data for them to move along.
The Wall Street Journal has been covering your idea, your initiative. And in coverage of this idea and the back and forth, they quoted a senior scientist and advisor to President Biden who said, "You'd be flying blind to just use one dose. If you're going to do something else other than follow the studies shown to the FDA, show me that this one-shot effect is durable." In doing research, the best that I could find was a letter to the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine from 2 Canadian doctors. Is that the best in terms of study or research that you're able to point to?
Look, I don't know what it'll be like in 6 months or 9 months from now, but I think it'll be sufficient protection until we have enough to get that second vaccine into everybody. And I actually think what I'm seeing on the studies I'm looking at shows that over a month, after 2 months, that the effectiveness even goes up more from just one shot. So I think that there's enough real-world data out there that the FDA should seriously consider the best way to use this finite resource.
And you made reference at the outset to the fact that, and I just want to make this clear, this is the approach being taken in the UK, true?
That's my understanding, yes. And I bet you'll see lots of other countries doing this as well. And that's not unusual. I come from the world of medicine, obviously, and typically the European Union, the UK is a little bit quicker to adjust to things. You know, I come from the real practical world. There's lots of science out there. How do we best apply it to my particular patient? Now, in this case, my particular patients, the entire population of the United States. But I think this is a real world application, and we need to give the FDA the ability to make some adjustments to use real world evidence to save thousands of lives.
Do you worry that if we were to go this route, it would give a sense of beer muscles to people who've already had one shot? In other words, they would think, well, one shot has now been given to me, and because of the efficacy from one shot, I'm not going to show up for a second, for a booster.
Look, I think that this is why we need pharmacists and doctors involved with this process, encouraging everybody to get their second shot. Look, if America can understand the different mask mandates we've been through, surely they can understand this, that when it's possible, get your second vaccination. It's going to increase your immunity, maybe from 75% up to 95% effective. So I think people will get that, especially if they get that follow-up email, text, phone call from their doctor's office, from the nurse. I encourage people to get that second shot. I think Americans are smart enough to figure this out.
And you're definitely of the opinion that they come back for a second shot, lest anyone hear this conversation or read some of the back and forth about it and think that you're advocating one and done. That's not what you're saying for Moderna and for Pfizer.
You are correct, sir. I want everybody to come back and get their second shot. Anybody that's had one shot needs to go ahead and get their second shot while we're sorting this out. But eventually, I think when we get to that low-risk group, we can get one shot in everybody's arm and then come back for that second shot, maybe at 2 months or 3 months, as soon as we have a supply is ramped up and the ability to give vaccines is ramped up. Yes, I want everybody to get their second shot.
I know this has been your opinion for quite some time. I take it was unchanged by the fact that President Biden just this week said that by May 1, every American will be able to get in line, and not long thereafter, there will be sufficient supply. I guess the question is, if there's truly that kind of light at the end of the tunnel, why then are you still advocating for spreading out the limited dosage that we have?
I think regardless of what the plan is going forward, we can reach herd immunity a month sooner if we do what I'm describing. And I think just to President Biden's point, we may have enough to get one shot in everybody's arm by May, and we may not. But I think that this is going to speed it up about 4 weeks to get that herd immunity one way or the other.
And finally, a critic would say, well, this is not the means or the use for which the FDA approval was given on an emergent basis. In other words, you're not using them as intended. And you would say what?
This is exactly why I want to empower the FDA to look at this real world evidence and make the decision. We don't want senators making decisions like this, but the FDA needs the authority, the ability under their EUA to have some flexibility. And I don't think that right now they have the flexibility to use real world evidence. So I want them to look at all this real world evidence out there, studies across the country, and then see if they come to the same conclusion that I do. So I think we're on the same page here.
Doc Marshall, thank you so much for your time.
You bet. Thanks for having me, and thanks for covering this issue.